Hi there, my name is Steve Gearhart, and as always, this is the Unagi Observer. Thank you so much for stopping by to watch the video. This week we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of the original televised version of James Clavell's Shogun that appeared in 1980. Not the 2024 version, which was very, very good, and I highly recommend it. We're going to talk about the one before it, in 1980, James Clavell's Shogun. Okay, so this is not going to be a comparison of the two versions of Shogun that we have, 1980 and 2024. We're not going to do a comparison, a full-on comparison between the shows. I will say simply that the 2024 version is able to have the benefit of CGI technology, better cinematography, production value is much higher in terms of what we get, what we pay, what they paid for, and what we get as viewers. So in that sense, yes, that can be called the superior version. But honestly, the two of them hold up very, very well on their own, and I'll explain why. Because the point of this video is talk about the impact of the 1980s version of James Clavell's Shogun. I've already talked about 2024, and in case you haven't noticed, I'm a big fan of it, and I'm so happy that second season is coming out. If you haven't seen it yet, please avail yourself of the show and watch it, and watch the 2024 version. You're going to enjoy it. It's very good. So let's get into the 1980 version, why it's so important. So, obviously based on the book by James Clavell, written in 1975. The whole premise of this book was based on the fact that his daughter had been writing a report for school, and he happened to be looking it over and saw an interesting line and said that there was an Englishman that went to Japan and he became a samurai. And he was just like, all right, is that true? And kind of looked into it, and sure enough, it's true. It's based, so the character Blackthorn in James Clavell's Shogun is based on the real life person William Adams, who was an Englishman who washed up on the shores of Japan and would eventually become, in real life, an actual samurai. Excuse me. And he thought this was very, very interesting. The story of William Adams was very interesting. Now, you have to understand that James Clavell is a historical fiction writer. So what he does with the history of Japan is he kind of shapes it a little bit to better reflect the story that he wants to tell. So in Shogun, you're going to be like, okay, I feel like that happened, but not really. And there's a reason for that. So it is based on a 30-year period after, at the tail end of the Sengoku period. Is actually the end of that 30-year period, right before the Edo period starts. And James Clavell thought this period was very interesting because at this point, there was no shogun in real life. There was no, or there was, but it was highly ineffectual. And that the emperor really had no role in anything. And this guy, William Adams, showed up, and he has this interesting story. So that's the fictional story he wanted to tell. And in the book, there are two major plot points. The first one being, of course, Toranaga, who is it's basically chronicling his rise to power. The book also talks about the romance between Blackthorn and Lady Mariko. So, again, Blackthorn is William Adams. Mariko is thought to be a fictional character. She may or may not have been a real person. It's not very clear. And Toranaga is an amalgamation of Toyotomi Ieyasu and one of the Tokugawas. And so that's the story he presents to us. So we get this story. It's published in 1975, and it's a very popular book. And people are kind of like, wow, you know a few things about Japan, and which is kind of interesting because he was in the British Royal Army. He was a naval, or I'm sorry, not naval army. He was a royal artilleryman, and he fought against the Japanese. But he really enjoyed the Japanese culture. He had a lot of respect for the people, and he himself has said over the years that when he wrote Shogun, it was not meant to be aren't they Japanese backwards people in 1600? Weren't they just just savages? No, he says, and I direct quote, "am pro-Japanese with this book." Okay, so he is not out to malign the Japanese people or the culture. So that was kind of interesting to have that kind of book out there. Just to give you an idea, he has Asia always in the back of his mind when he's writing, or when he did write. And he did another book called Taipan, so you should read that as well. It's pretty good. So anyway, so in 1979, the networks said, well, your book is very well received, people like it, and let's make a mini series out of it. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal. And here's why. Here in 2024, we have streaming services. We can watch stuff on our laptops. We can stream on Roku, on our televisions, and we can watch things on our phones. We can, all sorts of things. Budgets are created to make these lavish productions and to throw them on air for our consumption. So it's really easy. It's everybody's doing it. Everyone's got the money to do it, right? So it's just a matter of how well you want to do it. Well, in 1980s, television was a lot different. Insofar that it was just television. There were no streaming services. There was no cell phones. There were no alternative ways to watch this. So we had network broadcast television in 1980. Cable, as we know it, was in its infancy at that time. I think there were a couple different channels out there, Super TV, HBO, maybe a couple others out there that were just starting to get their footing. So broadcast TV, just in short, means that it is literally in a broadcast area. So if you live in a place where you can't get television reception, you don't get television. Now, fortunately, the broadcast system across the United States is pretty vast, large, and pretty well connected. So there were at the time very few places in the United States where you could not get broadcast television. So that meant that the people who were the channels that were broadcasting things had to have their own budgets. They had you had a main hub, and then you had individual markets all over the place. So what you might see in Baltimore on broadcast TV might not be what you see in Washington, D.C. in certain respects. So if you have primetime, pretty much everybody had primetime, right? So NBC had their shows at primetime. And ABC had it, and CBS had theirs. And so each broadcast area would have those main things for those channels, but then the broadcast area stations might have something else. Like they'll have more local stuff, more local news. Maybe people want to actually watch different types, or maybe they want to watch Star Trek in Baltimore, but they don't want to watch it in DC. So you get the idea. So everything has to be paid for, right? So everyone had to buy into this miniseries, and it was only on one channel, and so you had to buy into it. And this is a huge buy-in because this is 1980s America. We are really not really seeing the Japanese influence in our country just yet in terms of the economy. It's starting to take off in Japan. And so Americans don't really know that much about Japanese. What they know about Japanese pretty much is that they make kind of good cars at this point, and that there's this little thing called anime. There's this speed racer thing that's going on, and and the fact that we went to war with them, and that was the big takeaway, is that they were our enemy once. And so having a book turned into a miniseries that is pro-Japanese and tells a Japanese story, that was a huge risk. That was a huge risk for the networks and broadcast television in general. It's basically saying, we're doing something really new, and we're spending a lot of, well, in 1980s terms, we're spending a lot of money, throwing a lot of money at this, and we're hoping it does well. Doing well means advertising dollars. So they're looking to make a lot of money off of advertising. So they're trying to get as many big time companies to buy in to this production as much as possible. So once it shows, it was a 9-hour miniseries event. So miniseries were a big deal in broadcast television. You did long form formats. That's what you did in broadcast. So you did, you went on for dozens of episodes, if not hundreds. Like, they would make a big deal when a show reached its 100th episode. So miniseries was something you did when you had the budget to do it and the drive to do it, and you had the ability to make something worthwhile to do it. It was very, very rare. Here and today, we have miniseries all over the place. You take your pick. You got thousands to choose from. Excuse me. In 1980s broadcast television, that was having a miniseries event was a special event. People would block out their time in their day to watch this thing. Now remember, this is broadcast television, which means that if you missed an episode, you missed an episode. You're not going to see that episode ever unless they do a repeat, an encore presentation of that episode, or you would have to wait for it to go into reruns. So it's not like you go, oh, I missed it, I'll just go on Roku and just bring it up. You missed the episode, you missed that whole chunk of time. So when you're at the water cooler the next day and you go, did you see the episode last night? No, I missed it. Oh, dude, it sucked. And you got spoilers. So, because you had to, because you're not going to see that episode for a while unless they do an encore presentation. What is an encore presentation, you might ask? Encore presentation is when a network knows that they have something very, very important or popular, and then they say, okay, if you missed it on this day, we're going to show it again this weekend at a special time slot. Encore presentation. So we're going to show it to you again because we feel that we can make advertising dollars off of it, and the fact that you guys are writing letters saying, please, please, please show it to us. So that's what would happen if you got that. And that would depend upon the broadcast area. So some broadcast areas might show an encore of that episode of Shogun that you missed, or they might not. So there you go. So it's kind of a big deal. So here that you have this 9-hour miniseries event, which is basically 9 episodes, a little over 2 months of airing this show. 2 months. That means that you're taking something out of that time slot that they put it in. They put it in prime time because that's where it needed to be, usually a Friday or Saturday night. So they're making a huge gamble on the money that they're going to make. So they throw that in there, and they make this show, and they throw it in there, and it does very well. Several Emmys, it gets a whole bunch of accolades. Even before the 2024 version was made, when you said James Clavell's Shogun, even if you never read the book or saw the show, you know what that is, right? You have a general idea of what that is. That's how important it was and how it impacted the public consciousness. Now, when they did the miniseries event, when they created the show, the 1980s version, they took a look at the book and they said, okay. And James Clavell was heavily involved with the script. He hired somebody else to do the script, but he basically had the power of editor, right? And so they made a decision, and they said, looked at American audiences, and they said, Americans may or may not understand, Japanese power politics, why some of these things are important, like what is seppuku, and why would somebody just arbitrarily just be willing just to go, okay, fine, okay, that's what you're saying, I don't understand that. So what they did is that they took a lot of the power play. So Toranaga's storyline, the other second main point of Shogun, was put to the back. It exists as a subplot, so it's not as important as what they wanted to have the main plot be, which was Blackthorn's romance with Lady Mariko. So that's what they ran with, because they felt that American audiences would understand that a little bit better, and by using that construct, they could explain a couple of the things about Japanese culture that were relevant to the show that they knew that they had to keep in. So there's a lot of Japanese culture that is actually not in the 1980s version. Now, the period pieces, the set pieces there are very nice. They're very, for that time, very lavish. But you'll notice some things. You'll notice that everything is spick and span clean, because that's what people wanted to watch in 1980. They didn't want to watch grit. They were not interested in seeing dirty things. They were not interested in seeing a castle with a little messy courtyard. No, everything's immaculate. Everything is perfect. You'll notice that the armor looks a little plastic. So at the time, production values for samurai armor, when you're doing a movie in Japan, as well as here, it was very durable, heavy plastic, but it was plastic. So that's why it looks the way that it looks. They went very traditional in terms of Lady Mariko, how they presented her with the eyebrows and the whole 9 yards. So they went very, very traditional on that, very hard on the traditions of appearance. So when Toshiro Mifune, yes, that guy, Toshiro Mifune, Akira Kurosawa's muse, plays Toranaga in this version, and Richard Chamberlain plays plays Blackthorn in the 1980s version. They pulled some heavy hitters out of the... Look at the cast list of the 1980 Shogun, and you're going to see some heavy hitters, Japanese actor and actress hitters there. But what was more important was that Richard Chamberlain was in the movie. Richard Chamberlain was a big commodity at the time. He would go on to do... I forget if Thornbirds was before or after. I think it was after Shogun. But anyway... Richard Chamberlain was a huge, we want this guy in our thing, whatever it is. Don't care if he's playing a clown or not. We want him because everyone's going to watch Richard Chamberlain. So he was a huge network TV star. Everybody wanted him. Toshiro Mifune was recognizable by American audiences because he's been in a lot of Akira Kurosawa stuff, which actually made it to the United States over the years. So, excuse me, got a little frog in my throat. So here's a guy, that Japanese guy that people go, oh, hey, it's the guy from that movie we watched on Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, right? Yeah, it's that guy. Oh, cool. With Richard Chamberlain. Oh, well, who's this person playing Lady Mariko? She's kind of hot. Anyway, so they had a huge production value with that in terms of what they were doing. And like I said, the set pieces were immaculate. They were clean. Also, the other parts of network television is that there are a lot of things that we can do today in 2024 that in terms of risqueness or implications of things like that you couldn't do in 1980. So there wasn't a lot of talk about pillow women, about how Blackthorn is basically given a woman to a widow to have sexual congress with You just calm him down because he gets a little flustered every now and again. They literally go to this woman and go, "Can you just calm his ass down a little bit? Just sleep with him and just do something, make him just calm." And so that's not going to do well in 1980s network television. So you don't get those kinds of things. So it's very sanitary viewing. It's in terms of both morality and what you see and what you actually see on the television. It has to be, if you show this, you have to have it on 1980s broadcast television. When you make a show, it has to be able to be viewed by everybody: children, young adults, elderly. You get the idea. So they had to sanitize a lot of the story out of it. There are also some subtle differences between the 1980s version and the 2024. And insofar in the 2024, they focus on cannon. And in the 1980s version, they focus on muskets. Like I said, they focused on the romance between Blackthorn and Lady Manrico, as opposed to the war. But which is really kind of interesting, because when you get to the end of Shogun, it's all about Toranaga in the last 15 minutes. It's kind of funny. And they tell you how they kill Lord Ishido. They allude to it in the 2024 version, but they straight up tell you what they do to him. And it's kind of, you're like, oh dear. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, and so to have this miniseries do very, very well, it's a cash cow. Like I said, it earned a lot of rewards. Richard Chamberlain would go on with his career to bigger and better things, believe it or not. And so it was a huge success. What does that mean in television history? What it means is that they were able to solidify the idea of the miniseries, of basically saying, we don't have to do long form all the time. We can actually do a 9 to 12 episode storyline. And we have to make it special, though, and we have to make it important and make people want to see it. So we have to work the marketing around that. But we can tell these kinds of stories, and we can put that on television, and people will watch them as long as we do them well. You didn't, like I said, really get miniseries prior to that. It was a very special event. It was very special. There had to be a reason behind it that would engage people to say, okay, I want to give up my regular show that I watch in this time slot on Friday or Saturday night so that I can watch whatever this thing is. So after Shogun came up and showed the power of the economic power and the social power of what a miniseries can do, you start seeing miniseries being created more and more and more and more, until it got to the point where they started realizing, hey, we don't have to show things as reruns all the time during summer when production is up making the next season. We can actually provide new content during the summer, because that was the thing. So usually during the summer, you would have an end of the season, right? And then you have 2 or 3 months, June through August, where it was nothing but reruns. So if you missed anything of the prior season, so if you missed an episode, that was usually where you got to see it, where you got to back up and go, oh, okay, here's the episode I missed. So now they learned that they can actually have time. They have this time period where you can create a miniseries and throw it out there and maybe start making some new revenue. And so miniseries became more and more and more and more popular. So when you're looking at today's shows, when you're looking at things like Wednesday off of Netflix, or an HBO Max special, 4 episode special of whatever, or as they said, okay, this is, or we see Cyberpunk Edge Runners, right? It's just very short form. You got about 10 episodes. Here you go, and we see that all over the place, because that's our attention span now, is like really short form now. It comes from the miniseries that used to be shown on broadcast television, of which Shogun was not the first miniseries, by the way, but it was the first truly enormously, outrageously successful miniseries that got people to go, hey, maybe we should be doing this. So a lot of how we view today is a direct result from the 1980s version of James Clavell's Shogun. So there you go. Now you have it. Knowledge is power. Or so they say. Maybe. Works on trivia night. Alright, so that was a little bit of television history for you and an explanation as to why we have the format of viewing that we have in 2024. All started with Shogun, more or less. Anyway, you're probably going to ask, should I watch the 1980s version of Shogun? Yes, you should. There's actually quite a few different formats out there. You can go to, if you have a video store in your area that still exists, I do, Beyond Video, link down below. You can rent out, of course, the DVDs. There is a theatrical format, actually. After the miniseries came out, they actually cut it down to a little over 2-hour version of it and threw it into theaters, and it did fairly well. So if you come across that, you can see that. I'm sure that's somewhere on streaming land, as is the actual miniseries itself. I'm sure is on streaming somewhere. You just have to find it. So should you watch it? Yes, actually you should. And it would be interesting for you to watch this with this knowledge that I've given you and compare it to the 2024 version, which I also recommend that you watch. I think it would be an interesting comparison to see how things were differently. Just to understand that, production values a lot different in 1980 and 44 years later in 2024, right? So just remember, it's kind of, what it is? It's kind of like watching Mobile Suit Gundam from 1979 and watching Witch of Mercury. Now, obviously things are different and production values are different, but there's still some of them about that original Mobile Gundam suit, right? So same idea here. Doesn't have the same production values as the current version of Shogun, but the 1980s version, man, there's something cool about it, right? So yes, please watch it. All right, that's going to be it for this week. Gen Con is coming up. You'll have a video for that, just a little thing if you want to watch it, particularly if you play Genshin Impact. But we're going to be at Gen Con coming up pretty soon, and and I think we're going to be going to Season 2 in Anime Archaeology here pretty soon. And so keep an eye out for that. I'll let you guys know more about that when that happens. And so stay safe, stay well. Hope to see you in person someday. And love you guys. And as always, watch more anime. Or in this case, 1980 Shogun.